from Pontes Books here with the chapter 33 fun fact for the Prince and the Pauper. Today's fun fact relates to something that many people can relate to. It's a phenomenon that is very eerie if you've experienced it, and many people probably have, but there's not really any sort of scientific explanation behind it. So I wanted to explore that a little bit more. And that feeling is the sense that someone is watching you. So just kind of that feeling that you get, you know, kind of like the hair on the back of your neck stands up and you just feel like, I think someone's watching me. So I wanted to look into, you know, what sort of research or anything do we have behind that? So in The Prince and the Pauper, chapter 32, we see this referenced when Miles Hendon is going to try and find his father's friend, old Sir Humphrey Marlowe, to kind of help him out. And while he's walking by the palace, he gets this feeling. So Miles Hendon saved him the trouble, for he turned about then as a man generally will when somebody mesmerizes him by gazing hard at him from behind. So Miles Hendon could feel, so this is the young Humphrey Marlowe is the one who kind of spots him and is staring at him because he thinks it might be the person that Edward is looking for. And Miles can sense him looking at him and then turns around and then they have a conversation. So why do we get this feeling? Why do we all of a sudden feel like someone's watching us and then maybe you turn and someone really is? So there's a couple kind of, you know, explanations through psychology a little bit that we can have. Ultimately, there is zero evidence that this is a thing. There's not any sort of proof that people really do get this feeling and that it is accurate, but there are a few kind of explanations. So one, our eyes take in more than we realize. So, you know, your peripherals sometimes can pick up information and it can go to your brain, but you might not even be consciously aware of it. And there is some evidence to suggest this, right? This isn't necessarily why we get the feeling, but our brains can be sensitive to what our conscious awareness isn't. So specifically, if you look this up, a lot of people will reference a study in 1974 where, you know, a scientist proved blind sight, which basically they did experiments with patients who had their visual cortex destroyed. So they weren't aware of any sort of, you know, visual stimuli that was coming into them. They were blind, but their bodies could still respond to visual stimuli. I think there was like something that was like coming toward them or moving in front of their face or whatever, and they could still react even though they weren't consciously able to see it. So it's just showing that your brain can take in information and that it can be processed into up to a point where like you have a physical response without your conscious sight being aware of it. So some of those, you know, things that are happening around you, your brain could be aware of them even if you don't realize that it's aware of them. Another reason why we get this feeling is that we think ourselves into feeling this way. So this can go all the way back to, there was an article from 1898 and more recent ones as a result of it. But in this article, they kind of described this feeling of someone watching you as a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you feel like someone's watching you, and then as a result, you start acting kind of weird. You start acting kind of paranoid. You might be fidgeting, or maybe you like whip around really fast. And because you are kind of doing this strange behavior, then people look at you because they wonder what's happening. So then when you whip around, you see that people are looking at you. So you're kind of causing this to be true, or even just the fact that like someone might have happened to be looking at you, and then you see them looking at you and you make assumptions in your mind that they were watching you, whereas they might have just glanced over you briefly. So then another explanation of why we get this feeling is gaze perception. So our brains are specially designed, specialized to draw us to the gaze of others and draw us to the direction of their gaze. So this is part of, you know, our instincts, just in our genes, coming way back from our early, you know, ancestors who had to be nervous about their life every minute of every day because they, you know, risked death all the time. So knowing, being able to catch the eye of somebody, catch someone's gaze, or when they're looking at something, you quickly look at what they're looking at so that you know, it's a safety thing that you can make decisions based on what they're seeing. So I guess the idea being like, you know, back in the early days, if there was some sort of animal, some wild animal, I don't know, bear or something, and you're not facing that bear, but you see someone and you see their eyes, you immediately follow their eyes and know that there's a danger there. So as a result of that, we rely a lot on the gaze of people and meeting people's gazes. And a study found that people tend to assume that they are being watched if the visual clues weren't decisive, if their brain wasn't able to make those assumptions. For example, if a person nearby was wearing dark glasses, then our brain can't, you know, have all the information, so it fills in the gaps, thinking that they must be watching me, right? Same thing if like someone in the distance is like looking out a window and you can't quite tell where their gaze is going. Sometimes your brain fills in the gaps and thinks it must be looking at me. So that's just a little bit about why we get the feeling that someone's watching us. And again, it is something that is not proven in science or anything like that, but there are some theories that help to explain it a little bit. So hopefully you learned something. Have a good rest of your day.